Trailforks is wrong about the elevation numbers on this ride. With 3,600 feet of climbing over 17 miles and conveniently located just outside of Wenatchee, Washington, the Devil's Gulch Mission Ridge Loop is the first epic ride you should attempt if you've never attempted an epic ride. This 3-sandwich ride should also be at the top of the list for experienced bikers visiting the area. It's also an important canonical ride. Don't leave town without experiencing this. Beginning unassumingly at a wide spot on a Forest Service road at approximately 1,600 feet elevation just outside the town of Cashmere, Washington, I wasn't sure what to expect from this trail for the first few miles. It crosses a bridge and travels through some wet forest that could almost be mistaken for something on the west side of the Cascade Crest. To begin this loop, when you get to this intersection, take the right fork. No one in their right mind should attempt to climb Mission Ridge on a mountain bike. Perhaps on a dirt bike, but I don't ride dirt bikes, so I'm not sure how sensible that is either. Speaking of dirt bikes, this trail system is shared with dirt bikes, and that's actually a good thing because that means that it gets logged out pretty early in the season, as dirt bikers are pretty proactive about coming up here with their chainsaws and clearing the blowdown. More about the dirt bikes later though. Within a half a mile, the character of the woods changes as the trail pulls up through the canyon. This trail is pretty exposed, and for that reason, I don't recommend bringing your off-leash dog on this. That said, the exposure does add to the adventure and excitement of the climb. This is where the trail intersects with Red Hill, which I've been told is also a nice ride, but that's not where I went today. So if you want to do the big classic loop, continue to the left. Like pretty much any trail through a forest in the Pacific Northwest, this one passes through multiple burned areas. Fires are part of the natural life cycle of almost any forest, and the burned zones do open up some nice views through the canyon. It's neat to watch the succession of plant life in these diverse habitat zones. One thing I did notice on this entire ride, just repeatedly, is that both of these trails could really benefit from a hedge trimmer. They're still quite passable, but if I hadn't been wearing gloves, I would have been very unhappy. There are only a few places here in Devil's Gulch where I had to get off to walk my bike. On longer rides like this, I think it's always a good idea to save my legs for the rest of the ride instead of trying to prove a point by tackling every hill climb. The trail crosses the creek multiple times. In late June, I was not able to keep my feet dry on all the crossings. No big deal, just be aware that there are numerous crossings. If you do want to make a big deal about something, think about liking and subscribing, as well as navigating to my Patreon page at patreon.com/voiceovertrails. Also consider the membership options on this YouTube page. So, about the dirt bikers. One thing I noticed that was conspicuously absent on this trail was moto ruts. Any of you who've ridden dirt bike trails know what I'm talking about. It's the big ruts that often can get left behind by motorcycle users if there's enough of them. But in this case, there were only a few minor ruts in a couple of distinct places. In fact, the trail is in fantastic shape. And if there weren't tire tracks, it wouldn't even have been apparent that dirt bikers use this trail. Honestly, I have seen hiking trails. I have seen hiking trails in wilderness areas with deeper ruts on them. So this is a testament to fantastic trail design. There are some clues along the way about why this is, why there's so few ruts here. And there's some lessons in there about sustainable trail design. I observed that the character of the forest keeps changing with the elevation in this canyon, and after about 950 feet of climbing, the forest mostly transitions from Douglas fir to ponderosa pine as things get warmer and drier. I love that east side butterscotch smell. The first 1,000 feet of elevation on this ride is gained over 4.1 miles. That's only a 5% grade. In fact, the average grade of this climb from the parking area to the summit is only 6.7%. That's why this is such a great ride for somebody's first epic. I was shocked to find that my legs were not completely burned up when I got to the top of Devil's Gulch. That almost never happens on my big epic rides. Most of the big rides I do, I'm burned up within the first 2,000 feet, and then it's just a slog to get through the rest. This is also why there aren't moto ruts on this trail. That's the clue. That is a clue. Steep grades, ridiculously steep grades on trails, those are what lead to ruts. If you put a steep grade and you have motos, and actually any user group, it's just more apparent with motorcycles, but any steep grade leads to any mass trying to get up the hill needing to push more friction against the ground, and it displaces more material. That displacement of material is what leads to the ruts. And then water gets in there and it helps displace more of the trail tread and wash it down the hill. So yes, motorcycles can make that worse because of course they have a motor, they're bigger, they're heavier, there's more power there. But if you have a well-designed trail, if you have something that's sustainably designed like this, then it doesn't happen. Even the motorcycles don't displace enough material to cause an issue. So this trail keeps that under control. After 2,000 feet of climbing over 7 miles, the trail arrives at the first of a set of switchbacks that begin the climb out of the canyon. These switchbacks will gain about 500 feet over a mile with an average grade of around 10%. For a final climb out of a canyon like this, that's actually not that bad at all. These are also nice, wide, moto-friendly switchbacks with a large radius, which means that they also work well for you on a mountain bike, and they work well for hikers too because they keep sightlines open. Everybody can be happy. I kept being surprised at how much I got to stay on the bike and how little clever handling I really had to do to navigate this trail. And when you're 2,500 feet of climbing in, that matters. That matters a lot. It's a total of 900 feet of climbing over 2 miles from the first switchback to the intersection with the Mission Ridge Trail. This is a well-earned lunch spot with a nice little log for you to sit on, and you deserve a nice break before proceeding. Astute observers will note that their GPS is only showing 2,800 feet of elevation gain here, and that's because there is another 345 to 400 feet of climbing up the Mission Ridge Trail itself to get to the high point of the ride. So this isn't like the beginning of the downhill. Trail forks, though, this is where things get tricky with trail forks when you're trying to plan out this ride and what might have scared some of you away. Trail forks lists the elevation gain for the entire Devil's Gulch Trail up to its intersection with Forest Service Road 9712, but that's not really very useful information if you're planning on riding from the bottom. What you want to know is the elevation gain to this spot, the intersection with the Mission Ridge Trail, and that is 2,800 feet, and that's important. From here, proceed to the left up the Mission Ridge Trail and start climbing that 400 feet. Ridge trails are almost never a clean and straightforward descent. That is the essence of a ridgeline. It kind of follows the profile of the ridge. And this is also where the easy pedaling ends. There are a lot of sections along the Mission Ridge Trail that do require some getting off the bike and pushing. The majority of it is descending, but there are a lot of bonus transfer climbs in the middle of the descent, and they're non-trivial. Trail Forks, however, again, is incorrect. It claims that there is over 1,200 feet of climbing on the way down the Mission Ridge Trail. That is not true. That is just flat wrong. By my calculation, there was a far more manageable 700 feet of additional climbing when all of these bonus transfers were added up. And keep that in mind, that this first climb to the actual summit knocks out 400 feet of that. So there's only 300 feet left. That means from here, there are 3,600 feet of descent with only 300 feet of transfer climbing. And this descent is more than worth the effort. The descent starts out relatively tame up here at the top with a small amount of pedaling, and then it starts ripping in short order. Similar to the Devil's Gulch Trail, a lot of this is on the verge of being overgrown. A good share of this trail is on a relatively narrow bench, and the additional vegetation does not help with that as it pushes the rider over to the edge of the tread. The forest, though, is gorgeous subalpine mixed burn zone in various stages of recovery. It looks as if whatever fire burned up the forest on the Devil's Gulch side probably jumped the canyon and made it to this ridgeline, or maybe it was vice versa. It depends on which way the wind was blowing that day. Wear gloves on this ride. They're necessary to protect from the vegetation. The tread here is mixed light east side dust. I lucked out and it rained the morning I rode this. That's why I rushed to get over to this trail that morning. It was raining on my car when I woke up, so I wasn't kicking up a cloud of dust on this, but my car is caked in that stuff. It's caked in it from the roads around here. And trust me, it's like the consistency of flour, you know, the kind of dust you step in and then there's like little puffs of it around your shoes. So expect to be dusty. Give your friends some space for visibility if you're doing this with a group. The first bonus transfer climb is mild and comes after 900 feet of descent. The trail also changes character a little bit here, as it does throughout the descent. It's the variation, though, that really adds to the magic of this experience. Use these transfers as an excuse to take in the views from the ridgeline if it's a nice clear day. There are a lot of moto whoops on this descent. They're not quite ideally spaced for mountain bike, and for the most part, some of them are good, but the ones that are good are very pumpable, and you can add some additional speed that way. Pay attention to the various kinds of fire that move through these woods, though. Also, be careful about places where the trail pops over the ridge line to the other side. Some of them lead straight to deadly exposures to riders who don't check speed quickly enough. By the way, from up here, there is a clear view down to the Devil's Gulch Trail far below for keen-eyed observers. The middle section of the descent starts to encounter more of the granite substructure of the mountains, and as such, it starts getting a bit chunkier. The grade is steeper and the soil is both more shallow and looser, so it gets much more technical. I found this piece of the descent to be much more evocative of the moto trails in the Gifford Pinchot, but without the 4-foot deep ruts. It was fun to get some tech thrown in for some flavor. Speaking of ruts, as this trail is steeper, there is some moderate moto rut sculpting on the tread. That, in addition to the looseness of the soil here, had me fishtailing a bit more than I'm comfortable with, as there is no consolidated base layer to the tread in here. Therefore, there's very little traction to work with. In some cases, dragging the back wheel felt like the safest option, as I was a little hesitant to use my front brake too much. I was trying to preserve all the traction I had in the front wheel for steering. There is too much to this descent to cover everything in this video without boring you to tears, and I know you want to go ride this yourself rather than just watch me talk about it. There are about 5 or 6 transfer climbs in the middle, all with short little descents after them, which then end in another little climb. The trail eventually arrives here at the top of the last descent, and this one is a long one, lasting a full 13 minutes back to the car for me. I'm sure it'd be faster for riders who are faster than me, but just, 10 to 13 minutes, right? The most distinct feature of this descent, aside from the epic views of textured mountains and dramatic slopes of bare granite plunging to the canyon floor, is just the amount of variation in the scenery. There's so much to see in here. The views aside, this trail is the perfect progression trail for intermediate riders, and coupled with the Devil's Gulch climb, makes for the perfect first epic for anyone who hasn't yet ridden over 3,000 feet on a bike ride. Both of these trails can be shuttled as well, although the shuttle route is a long one. It does appear on the map that there should be some forest roads that act as a shortcut, but they are no longer open. So the shuttle does require a detour around Wenatchee and through the town of Cashmere for the retrieval. Although Cashmere does look like a picturesque spot to stop for lunch and tuck into a nice pint of cider at one of the local tasting rooms. They do a lot of apple cider here, because apples, Washington, apple trees. All right, this is all the more reason to ride this as a loop and get that first epic into the ride log. I'd like to take this moment to thank all my Patreon supporters, especially my Lonely Goodness level sponsors, Charles Kim and Ellie West. I'd also like to thank my Hero Dirt level sponsors, Bryce Ulrich, Devin Young, and Edward Lanton. If you'd like to join all these sponsors, who, for as little as $3 a month, are helping me defray the costs of operating this channel, navigate to patreon.com/voiceovertrails and become a member. Now, get out there and go ride your bike.